Okay, so your unit exam, okay, coming up on Thursday of next week, okay, and we obviously want to be ready for that. So I have already posted on Google Classroom the review package. Okay, there is just the review package with just the questions, and then there's the review package with the key. Okay, so it's two separate files, so that obviously the answers aren't right there when you're doing it, because that seems to be less effective. So the two files are on there. Like I said, you should probably do just the review activities first, do some studying first before you go tackling the practice test. I will tell you that that practice test is a quite an old version of the test. The version you have is going to be a bit different than that, but I'll tell you what kind of differences there are going to be, and that I'm changing the focus of a few things on there, but at least you'll get the hang of how I'm going to word things. The multiple choice questions are pretty much like what I would ask. But I will tell you that there are going to be a few different focuses. There's a bit more focus on this exam compared to the practice test on plants and plant transport. Okay, the exam that is the practice exam is a lot more focused on cells, and it was weighted just too much in favor of cells, which is why I changed it. So now it's the one you're going to write has a lot more stuff on plants and plant transport than the practice test does. Okay, it still has stuff on cells, but it's got more stuff on plants and plant transport. Okay, so things we went over. First thing we went over, cell theory. Okay, and of course, there's 3 points to the cell theory, so that sets up very well for a multiple choice item, which is the following is not part of the cell theory, things like that. But the biggest part of cell theory is the second point of the cell theory, and that is that cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. That idea can be worked into just about any answer, any written response answer about cells. Okay, it really can. And the more you incorporate it, as long as you're not grasping, like you're not just cells, basic functions, I'm going to put that in there because Kader said so. Okay, make sure you tie it in, but it can really be tied into just about any question about cells. So just keep that in mind, that is a theme that came back several times throughout this unit. Okay, I mean, our cell anatomy lab was based entirely on it. Okay. So make sure, yeah, like I said, explain in some of your written response items. Okay, that's going to be kind of the big place for that. Okay, am I going to ask very much about the people? I mean, last names, but only that you would recognize what they did. like which of the following viewed the first living cells? Hook, Leeuwenhoek, Schleiden, Schwann, okay, something like that. But I mean, there's only four names, and two of them always go together. Okay, Schleiden and Schwann always go together, so it's not like there's a lot to remember about them. Okay, the microscope. I had told you, I think it was your guys' class. I told the other day that I was definitely going to ask you to draw a lab drawing on the test, and then right after I did that, I changed my mind. Okay, and I actually changed the test that evening because I've never asked you to draw one by hand, and you would have to draw it by hand on the test, and I just didn't think that was fair. But there's still going to be stuff about estimating the size of an object. Okay, you're still going to be asked to do that. You may be asked to critique a diagram, like what's wrong with this one. Okay, if I show you one, what's wrong with it, something like that, as opposed to you have to draw it, because it's just not an effective use of time on the test. Okay, so definitely that. There could also be a few questions about use of the microscope. Okay, format of lab drawings, okay, things like that. How the microscope works, since we did do a lab where we investigated that, the refraction of light and stuff. Okay, so I would say that most of that is probably going to be multiple choice. Okay, most of the stuff about the microscope is going to be multiple choice stuff. And there are 26 multiple choice questions on the test. Okay, third thing we went over, modes of nutrition. You definitely need to know the terms, photoautotroph and chemoheterotroph. You need to know what impact that's going to have on the structure of cells. If you're a chemoheterotroph, what are your cells going to look like? Are there special organelles they're going to have? Same with photoautotroph. Okay. You could be asked to compare and contrast. Okay, so and maybe in a written response question. Okay, functions of organelles. In other words, labeling a cell. Okay, cell structure, being able to do essentially what you did on the 3 quizzes on the cell that you had in class. Okay, do I want paragraph answers for the functions of the organelles? No, I don't. Okay, I just want quick answers. In fact, in the one part of the test where you're asked to label and give the functions, I made a table. And honestly, you probably can't write more than a very short sentence in the field that I've left for you. Okay, so answers like what you put on the quizzes would be fine for the functions. Like if we're talking Golgi apparatus, you'd say packages waste for removal, or I'm talking about the rough ER transports proteins. Okay, those answers would be fine. They're effectively what that organelle does. Okay, so function organelles and cellular transport. If there's one thing on this test that is focused on or weighted more heavily than anything else, it is transport within cells and in terms of an entire organism like the plant. Right? So expect there's probably going to be one written response question for each of the big 3. What are the big 3? Nope. Those are the little 3. I'm looking for the big 3. Okay, active transport, diffusion, and osmosis. Those are the big 3 methods of cellular transport. Okay, diffusion is passive, not targeted. We had that whole thing with the cubes, okay, that we did that's all about that. Okay, and there's probably going to be a question about cell size and transport because we did an activity on it. So expect something like that where you talk about the drawbacks of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. And the way that those are going to be asked is they're going to be situational questions. Okay, here is a situation. Identify what mode of cellular transport would be most involved here. Explain how it works. Predict what would happen. Okay, so there'll definitely be application type questions, one for each of the big 3. Okay, now in terms of endocytosis, exocytosis, and receptor-mediated endocytosis, okay, pinocytosis, phagocytosis, those are smaller versions. They're not true cellular transport because they're more the cell actually consuming something. Okay, so they're different in that regard. Doesn't mean they won't be on there, but they're not like written response material. Okay, I'd write that down because a lot of people make that mistake. Those 3, okay, endocytosis, exocytosis, and by endocytosis I mean phagocytosis, pinocytosis, receptor-mediated endocytosis. Those are not written response level things. In other words, if you read a question in the written response and it sounds like cellular transport, it's not one of those. It'll be diffusion, active transport, or osmosis. Those are the big 3. Those are the ones I really want you to know. Okay, so just quick review here. Okay, remember that osmosis is going to move only water. Okay, can only move water across the membrane. Okay, so and it is movement across the membrane, not within the cytoplasm. It does that in order to balance salt concentrations. Okay, look for a practical application of that or a situation. Okay, diffusion, that's going to be almost entirely related to cell size. Okay, so the application would probably have something to do with here's a cell, is big or small, and what are the advantages, disadvantages, something like that. Okay, and then active transport, remember it uses energy and a certain part of the membrane. What part of the membrane does it use? Carrier proteins. Okay, probably also something you'll want to work into your answer in some way when you're talking about active transport. Okay, the biggest trick to those questions is correctly identifying which one is the one for that question. So you read that situation and you have to go, okay, is that active transport? Is it osmosis? Or is it diffusion? Okay. So if the question talks about moving calcium, which one's definitely out? Osmosis. Okay, and it's talking about moving calcium from one place to another in the cell. Which one is out? Right, because active transport is moving across the membrane. Okay, if it says something about moving it to an area of high concentration, okay, then it's active transport. You know diffusion has to be out in that situation because it can't do that. Okay, things like that. Look for those little key things. You have to really know the characteristics of each cell type, of each cell transport type. Sorry. Okay, cell size, surface area to volume. I kind of already talked about that, but definitely expect a written response question that's going to ask you to, deal with a situation about what happens when a cell gets too big, or why is having a small cell advantageous, things like that. Okay, multicellularity. It's definitely going to be some multiple choice stuff about multicellularity, but it could also find its way into the written response. Remember that a true multicellular organism will show this. Okay. It will have specialization. That is, the cells within that organism are not all going to be the same. There's going to be division of labor because there are cells that are better at doing something than other cells are. Okay. And also remember that the idea of multicellularity goes back to this idea of cell size. The advantage of being multicellular is you can overcome this problem and you can get big. Okay? Because you're made up of many, many small cells, your surface area to volume ratio is good, even though you're big, and that is obviously an advantage. Okay? That's an idea that you'll probably need to remember. Okay, so what were the advantages? We kind of just talked about that here. Okay? Okay, will you need to know the two cell types? Eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Yes, multiple choice, okay, most likely in a multiple choice kind of situation, but definitely know the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. If you're multicellular, which one are you? Right, you're eukaryotic. And eukaryotic cells have, what's the big long word? Starts with C. Compartmentalization, right. Okay. Hey, it started with C. It's good. All right. Number 7, plant structure. Okay. So talking about, the roots, the stem, the leaves, what's their role, looking at the layers of the leaf, because the layers of the leaf go back to number 6. Okay, if you're multicellular, you have specialization, and the layers of the leaf are our best example of differentiation of cells, cells doing different jobs, okay, things like that. So those two things can easily be worked together in a thorough answer about plant structure or leaf structure or multicellularity. Okay? They can definitely be, if the question's about multicellularity, you can go and say, hey, plant structure, leaf looks like this, that's an example of, or if it's about plant structure, you can work this one in. Okay? They definitely go together. Okay, so roots, stem, and leaves. Okay, leaf structure, need to know that. Palisade layer, spongy layer. Okay, the epidermis, and that it secretes the waxy cuticle, and the stomates and the guard cells, and all of that scare. All again examples of specialization in a multicellular organism. Right, plant transport. We did a lab on it, so it's definitely going to be something that's emphasized on the test in both multiple choice and written response sections. Okay, remember that it's osmotic pressure. We talked a little bit about yesterday. Okay, that is going to set up the force that's going to pull water up the plant. However, it can't do it by itself. It's lucky that water is a polar molecule, cohesion and adhesion also work in there. Okay, it's definitely something you'll want to explain. Okay, and when you're explaining that process of osmosis, explain why the osmotic pressure gets set up. Okay, why does osmotic pressure get set up in the leaf? Exactly. Okay, when water evaporates because of photosynthesis through the stomates, minerals that were in the water are left behind. That's what sets up the osmotic pressure. Okay, remember also that you got the two different tubes within the stem, the xylem and phloem. Okay, probably better be able to describe each one and what they carry, what direction they carry it in, what forces help them to do that. Obviously, we just talked about what works in the xylem. Okay, but in the phloem, we're transporting what? Sugary sap, and what helps do that? Gravity. Yeah. Okay, things like that. Okay, like I said, there's a question number 1's a 6-mark question about this. Written response. Okay, got to know it. Okay, and then we got plant growth and development, which is the most recent thing that we talked about. Okay, in there we're going to talk about plant hormones, tropisms, okay, things like that. And again, those are going to be questions that I will ask in terms of a situational question. I'm going to show you a picture of a plant. Okay, I'm going to show this a plant and it's a strange picture. Okay, it's a picture of a plant, and I'm going to say, here's the situation this plant is in. Explain. Okay, tell me what happened. Why does this plant now look like this? Okay, and that's all going to come back to plant growth and development, hormones, tropisms, things like that. Okay, you're going to have to look at it and evaluate what you think has happened and what's going on, okay, and explain. So plant hormones, tropisms, okay, and remember that a tropism is caused by differential rate of growth. That was something I highlighted, keyed in on big time, okay, when we talked about it that day. But if you're saying, hey, that plant in that picture, Mr. Coder, it was, it's totally thigmotropism, and remember that tropisms, Mr. Coder, are caused by differential rate of growth, and that means that you have more auxins on one side. Like, really, okay, get into that. The difference, guys, on this test between people who do really well and people who do okay is level of detail. Okay, look at what the question is out of. If the question is out of 5 marks, and you go, if in this picture you say, thigmotropism, growth to touch, and it's a 5-mark question, how much am I going to give you? Probably 2. That's really what you've given me. You identified the tropism, and you told me why it happens, but you didn't tell me how. That's the other 3 marks. Okay, explaining, hey, there's this differential rate of growth. It's auxins. What does that mean? There's another 3 marks there. It's level of detail. Okay. In some questions, level of detail is important. So always look at what the point value of a question is when you are writing out your answer. Okay. On that same token, don't write 10 marks worth of stuff for a 3-mark question. Okay. Well, but here's the thing. Here's what I found happens when people do that. A, they have trouble finishing the test. B, they contradict themselves. Okay. When you tend to start writing too much, you tend to start saying the opposite of what you started saying, and then I can't give you marks for it if it's right, because you said this, but then you contradicted it by saying this, which says, I don't really know, but I'm writing everything down that I know in the hopes that something I wrote down is right. Well, that's not really going to work for you. If you contradict yourself, then I can't give you marks. Okay, it's like going to the voting booth and voting for 2 people. Okay, what do they do to your ballot? Rip it up. Okay, you spoiled your ballot. Okay, you have to choose. If you contradict yourself in your answer, then I don't know whether you really knew it or not, and I have to assume you didn't. Okay. Okay, so factors, resources, competition, that's what we talked about day before yesterday. Okay, and also there's a little bit of stuff about scientific method again, like those questions that you had on the first unit exam where I described an experiment and asked you what was the manipulated variable. Okay, in this case, it might be more like describe how you might test something, okay, like in a written response question. you had a question like that in your plant transport analysis, okay, that's due on Monday. Yeah, Monday. Okay. There's that question that says, how would you test the effect of salt? Okay, so that's kind of like briefly designing an experiment kind of a thing. Okay, you might be asked to do something like that as well. Okay. All right, so that's what's on there. 26 multiple choice questions. And I believe it's 9 written, but I'll just double check here. Okay, so 26, and there's 53 marks in the written. And there are 9 questions in the written response. It's out of 79, yeah. So that's less than your chem test. Okay, but remember, in your chem test, okay, it was all like, show me your skills, show me your skills. Now it's going to be explain and things like that. So it sometimes takes a little longer to write the biology exam because you actually have to write more. Okay, as opposed to, you know, on the chem test, you wrote down some numbers and letters and balanced equations, and, you know, if you knew what you were doing, you could do that pretty quickly. In bio, you may well know the answer, but it takes you a little longer to write it because you have to write a little bit more. So make sure that you are managing your time well, okay, on Thursday of next week. Obviously, you should do the written response first, okay? Just make sure you get that done because, again, you're going to have answers to write out and you want to be thorough, and the multiple choice tends to go a bit faster. You can have a calculator, but I don't think you're going to need it. Okay, like, I mean, doing a size estimate for a microscopy estimation is not like difficult math, but if you feel like you'd rather have a calculator, by all means, you can have one. Okay, obviously you'll have to turn in your phones again, same as before. What else? Yes, yeah, you get the entire class to write it. And if you want to get a bit of a head start, okay, I will let you start the test at, let's say, 8:35, because you guys always lose about 5 minutes for O Canada and morning exercises and all of that. So I'll let you start at 8:35. Okay, if you want to come in here at that time as soon as you get off the bus, okay, pile on in and I'll let you do that. Okay. It's not that I think you're going to need that kind of time. I don't think time is going to be a big factor on this test, but like I say, you're actually writing stuff, so it does take a little bit longer. Okay. Are there questions you guys would like to ask and have me answer about anything from this unit? Chloe. The 3rd, Thursday, yeah.
Can you kind of explain number 10?
Yeah, that's with the experiment, right? I give you an experiment and you identify a variable, or I ask you, how might you test this? And you would kind of give me a brief description of an experiment. Okay. All right. Rest of the class you have to do some of your review. If you want, you can pull out your phone and you can look up on Google Classroom the review package. I didn't print it this time because I am trying to go paperless. Okay. So it's on there. Okay. Obviously, you guys can access that. If you don't have a phone, you need to borrow a Chromebook. I think there might be 1 or 2 in there, or there's laptops in there or something we can get you. Okay. No, I can't. Yeah. Maybe if you pop in like right after period 4, I can maybe have a quick look. Okay. All right. Any other questions there, guys? All right. Let's use our time effectively. If more questions come up, ask. Okay. That's what I'm here for. So ask if you got more.